for it. This
Same.
is just basically going to be having a conversation between Dan and Matt on camera, which is going to be kind of horrifying, but
well, Mom will enjoy it.
Mom will enjoy it
as per usual.
I haven't even gotten into the spiel yet, but I feel like we're going to keep all of this in, I think. But I want to say
entirely
hi.
Possible.
Welcome back to the Heights podcast. My name is Matt. I'm one of the pastors at Heights Baptist Church, and we love to explore issues of faith, culture, and the church. And today I am welcoming back to the podcast a very, very good friend and a family member of the Hogan household. This is my brother, Dan. And so, Dan, welcome back to the podcast. I'm so glad that you're here.
Happy to be here.
I'm glad we were able to make this work. We had a lot of scheduling conflicts. We've been trying to make this happen for a couple weeks now. But we managed to get here, and despite some car trouble and a tow truck and a few other issues today, we're here together, and we're here to talk.
It was car trouble for you today, and last week I had to go to the veterinarian.
You had to go to the veterinarian, or your dog had to go to the veterinarian?
Well, somebody had to take him.
So the last time, so real quick, just go ahead and refresh our audience's memory as to who you are and what you do besides being like my brother. Tell our audience about what you do for a living.
All right. So I'm a college professor. I teach at the community college in Riverside City College. Riverside is about 50 miles east of Los Angeles. And so I've been here for almost a decade. And I teach largely introduction to freshman composition, introduction to literature. But occasionally I wear a few other hats. And one of the hats that I wear, in our previous conversation, we talked about a class I taught about the Bible. And today we're going to talk about one of my other hats, which is I teach screenwriting. So I teach movies. And it is a big week when it comes to movies. So at time of recording, we're on a Tuesday morning here. And the previous Sunday was the Oscars. And the big movie at the multiplex now is Dune 2, which was one of my favorite movies that I've seen recently. And because I am a card-carrying dork, and I love sci-fi and fantasy. And so this was a very important time in my life as a cinephile and a dork.
That's awesome. Yeah. So the last time we met together, we spent a lot of time talking about the Bible and what it's like teaching the Bible on a college campus versus like what it's like teaching the Bible like in a church context. And we really nerded out on that. And today we're going to nerd out on another of our favorite topics, which is movies.
Yes. And you might be thinking, okay, so why are we talking about movies when it comes to a podcast for the church? And, as a connoisseur of the arts, I am reminded of, the history of art. Here's where I get my pinky out and I get very professorial. The history of art. The church has been one of the largest forces in the arts for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. All the way back to collecting the artisans to decorate Solomon's temple. Mm-hmm. You have a long tradition of the arts, whether that is visual arts or performing arts or whatnot, literary arts, having very close ties to the church. And part of that is because, as I believe, God has created us in his own image. And what does God do? Well, he creates stuff. And so in turn, what do? We create stuff.
That's right.
I think that God has created us as artistic beings. And one of those forms of art is filmmaking. Mm-hmm. In the last 100 years or so, with television and movies, that has become the dominant cultural art form of our time. A couple thousand years ago, it was you get Sophocles up there and they're doing their Greek tragedies, and we had Shakespeare, and we've had the Leonardo da Vinci and the Renaissance. And so different time periods will have different forms of art that take center stage. But this day and age, it's what's playing at the multiplex and what's streaming on Netflix.
Hmm.
Um, and in doing that, uh, sometimes Christians, I find, are a little bit conflicted because they think, okay, well, there's all of this art out here, but not all of it is about God,
Hmm.
right? This isn't necessarily, it's not Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel with the creation of Adam here. It's insert superhero movie here or drama there or comedy there. And one of the issues that I see that in my experiences is, at least for me growing up, was this conflict between loving the arts and then also loving my faith. And how
Hmm.
do I reconcile the fact that I love the arts and love my faith? Um, and I'm reminded of a time I went to a convention. I think I was like maybe 15. And it was at Biola University. And one of the things that what the speakers was talking about was uh, he was talking about, this was a media conference at Biola University, and he was talking about this very issue. And the point that he made was that all all things beautiful, all things true come from God.
Hmm.
Similarly speaking, all art is God's art.
Hmm.
And even if people don't want if people don't believe in God or they don't want to glorify God or they're contrary to God, is that ultimately if an art form is true, it will reveal true things about the universe that God has created.
Hmm.
Uh, and the example he gave, for instance, is he was sort of joking about the fact that this was that sometimes even people who are contrary to Christianity or contrary to God will inadvertently end up making art that speaks to the glory of God. And his
Hmm.
example was um, there's a filmmaker named Guillermo del Toro. He's an excellent filmmaker. He's a Mexican filmmaker. He has won several Academy Awards. He's known particularly for the horror and fantasy genres. So
Is he
very,
Pan's Labyrinth? Pan's
yes, he's
Labyrinth?
Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah.
Um, he
Hellboy?
so he yeah, he did the Hellboy movies. I think he won the Oscar for The Shape of Water, which
Okay.
was an odd film to say the least. But the uh what and this might be an apocryphal story, so I'm not sure, but what the speaker was saying is he said um they were making an adaptation of C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia.
Hmm.
This was about 20 years ago. And they asked Guillermo del Toro if he was interested in doing an adaptation of Chronicles of Narnia because he's very into fantasy and it was a fantasy property. And he said, I'm not interested in doing a Christian allegory.
Hmm.
That's not something that I'm interested in doing. I don't want to do, The Lion, which is sort of a Jesus reference, and it's not something I want to do. So instead, the movie he made was Pan's Labyrinth. The climax of Pan's Labyrinth is a young girl who is faced with the opportunity of getting what she wants in life or sacrificing her own life to save the life of an innocent uh, child,
It's
her
a
younger
picture.
brother.
It's a picture of the gospel.
It's a picture of a gospel. He did not want to make a movie that was a gospel metaphor. And so instead he made a movie that was a gospel metaphor.
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, this woman or this young girl, she sacrifices her life to save the life of someone else. And then, um, because it's sort of fantastical, there's like this afterlife scene where she raises from the dead. And he basically told the story of the gospel by not trying to tell the story of the gospel.
Hmm.
And the point is, ultimately, the reason that people gravitate toward movies is because they're all telling the story of the gospel.
Hmm.
They're all telling, if they're good, they're telling stories that are similar to the stories that are in the Bible, to the stories of the gospel, because that's what we resonate with. And it's not just Christians who think about this. If you study story structure, what you will find is that many forms of storytelling across cultures, with Christian, non-Christian, Europe, Africa, the Middle East, they will tell very similar versions of the same story. There's a theorist named Joseph Campbell who wrote this book called A Hero with a Thousand Faces
Mhm.
that tracks all these different kinds of stories throughout time, and they have similar plot structures. They have similar motifs. And the thing is, if you ask me, it's because human beings are wired to love art and to love stories.
Mhm.
And the stories we respond to are very often similar to the stories that are in the Bible, the story of the gospel. That's stories that sort of approximate the God-shaped holes in our heart resonate with us,
Absolutely.
whether or not the people making them are aware of that or intending that.
You know that the scripture says greater love has no man than this, that he lays down his life for his friends. And so I know
Exactly.
anytime I'm watching a film and you're in a situation where there's a character who's willing to lay down their life for someone else for it to save the innocent, that's always something that resonates with me. And I know it's like the silliest of all examples, but I love the movie Wreck-It Ralph.
Yes.
Um, and at the climax of the movie, Ralph is rocketing towards the big like bomb at the end, and he's actually quoting the Serenity Prayer as he goes down to the and he's giving up his life in order to save all of the other characters in the film. And it's a cartoon, and it brings tears to my eyes every time I watch it. As you've got a character who's willing to say, the putting the others first, that kind of sacrificial love is something that's powerful and just resonates with us.
Definitely. Definitely. Um, and we were talking before that we fired up the pod here about some of our favorite movies from the last year or so.
Mm-hmm.
And that same theme reminds me of one of my favorite movies from the last year, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3.
Oh, it was a good one.
And that theme of sacrifice for your friends. That movie is about sacrificing for your friends.
Mm-hmm.
The talking raccoon gets hurt in the beginning of the movie. And the entire rest of the movie is this group of misfits who are rejected by their families, and they've gone through struggles and they've gone through turmoil, and they've gone on adventures, but there's been a lot of pain. But all of them stop fighting with one another. Well, they keep fighting with one another, but they all agree. The one thing they all agree on is that because the raccoon is hurt, that they're going to get together and they're going to go save their buddy.
Mm-hmm.
The whole movie is this mission about how they're going to risk their lives to save their friend. And by the same token, the raccoon is willing they're basically all trying to sort of outdo one another to sacrifice for one another.
Mm-hmm.
And there are biblical elements of the movie, which again, it is about talking animals in space.
That's right.
But uh, there are, you can see the love of Christ in a talking raccoon. You can see that with the way that they treat one another as family. It reminds me, the whole conceit of the film is it's a group of misfits who've gotten together and become a family.
Right.
Where have we seen that in the Bible? Jesus's disciples is a group of misfits
That's right.
who become a family, and their allegiance is no longer to their tribe or to their family or to their social class. Their allegiance is to one another. They've become the body of Christ. Now, in this case, this is the Guardians of the Galaxy are not exact, there's no Jesus character who comes in here and says, and like it's not like Stan Lee cameos as Jesus here. But similarly, you have that example of loving one another. How you know that the Guardians of the Galaxy are family is not that they all look like each other.
Right.
They're not even all the same species. Not that they always get along, because they have arguments. Not that they are all from the same background or social class, but because they love one another.
Mhm.
Doesn't get more Christian than that
That's right.
in a movie about space aliens and talking raccoons and a talking tree. And that's the kind of thing that basically reminded me, um, as a connoisseur of movies, that it's not just, there are some excellent Christian movies.
Right.
The movies that come to mind are The Passion of the Christ, or movies with not necessarily about Jesus, but with sort of overt Christian themes, like
Mhm.
Chariots of Fire.
Mhm.
There are some of those movies that are great,
Yeah.
but it doesn't necessarily have to be an adaptation of the Bible or about Christians to teach us about what it means to be a Christian.
Mhm.
One of my favorite books of the Bible is the book of Esther. The book of Esther is notable that they never mention the name of God.
Mhm.
It is a story that is full of plot twists and violence and sexual content and people behaving badly. And what you can see is, by not mentioning God, if you read between the lines, you see the hand of God
Mhm.
at work in the lives of these people who are not necessarily always glorifying God.
Right.
And it's kind of like Hollywood, where you can see the hand of God at work in the themes of lots of films.
So one of the questions that I have, as far as like a filmmaker or an artist, when they set out to create a piece of artwork, um, we're not necessarily saying that that artist or that filmmaker doesn't have a message that they're consciously trying to convey.
Lots of them do. Lots of them do.
And the so I think what I'm going after is like, we still believe that authorial intent is important.
Yeah.
One of the principles that we use when we study the Bible, for example, is we're trying to get after what the biblical authors were trying to convey in their time, in their context, in their historical period, and try and figure out how to understand what they were saying in the setting in which they were saying it, so that we can understand how it might pertain to us today. So we're not saying that, like, we're not saying that a filmmaker doesn't necessarily have something that they're consciously trying to do, but what we are saying is that sometimes, even if they're not consciously trying to, well, a lot of times, even if they might not necessarily be a believer, um, biblical themes are still present in movies, because those are themes that resonate with us as human beings.
100%. Yeah. There is a film criticism concept called the death of the author. And what that means, that, it's not like the author literally dies. I mean, people pass away, but the idea is, once a work of art is created, while that creation is happening, the author is putting everything that they want the work of art to do into the work of the art.
Mhm.
But the thing is, once it's created, the art speaks for itself,
Mhm.
and people interpret the art.
Mhm.
And so sometimes what ends up happening is, the artist might have one idea, and other people might say, this movie makes me think this, or this piece of art, this means this to me, which might not be anything that the author was actually thinking about. But the often it's because the audience will interpret something and
Mhm.
say, no, that reminds me of this other thing, or um, it will speak to themes, whether or not the author intended it, that will strike chords with lots of people. I'm reminded of an artist that I follow, a fantasy author that I follow, and he wrote a story about kind of magical zombies. And then he got lots of fan mail from people who suffered from chronic pain, like cancer patients, and said, your magical zombie story, uh, spoke to me as someone who suffers from debilitating pain. I feel like I was finally understood and you understood. And this author was like, what?
That wasn't
Like,
even on his radar.
that wasn't even on his radar. He had no idea that it would speak to people like that. But he did anyway, because that's part of how art works.
One of the things that I wonder, I think there might be a little bit of a chicken or an egg question about, am I more am I more prone to see gospel themes in movies because I'm a follower of Jesus and because the story of the gospel is something that I spend a lot of time studying and thinking about and talking about, so I kind of see it everywhere? Or is that just because it's part of the human experience, or is it a little bit of both?
Yes. Um, I think it's a little bit of both. And perhaps one of the ways to phrase it, if we're talking about literary criticism or film criticism, is we call it a lens with which we view media. And there's lots of lenses that people will use. And in literary studies, often we will talk about lenses like psychology. And so, you can watch a movie and you can psychoanalyze every single character and think, this is oh wow, this tells me a lot about the human psyche because, well, it was written by a human, and so truths about human psychology will come out in any work of literature. um Similarly, gender studies, okay, people will look at a movie and see, okay, well, this is men and women and how they interact with one another and how they're different from one another and how they value and how society values that. And you can kind of look at it through this because, again, gender is something that's important to human society.
Mm.
Similarly speaking, if you look at the at art through a gospel lens, it adds another layer to enjoyment to be able to see, okay, well, what does this teach us about the gospel? Whether that was the intention of the audience or author or not.
Right. So speaking of gender studies, you want to talk about Barbie?
Let's talk about Barbie. So, Barbie Barbie's going to go down in the history books as like master class in selling a movie.
It was, yeah, the it was geniusly marketed. Geniusly.
Geniusly marketed. So I went and saw Barbie. My wife is not very into movies, and so she was not interested in Barbie ever. She was like, I stopped playing with Barbies when I was 10. So like, I'm a grown woman. I don't need to go see a Barbie movie. Most women in America disagreed. um, so I went and saw Barbie for science. And as a grown man, this movie was not designed for or marketed to me. So when I looked at it, I knew that I was watching a movie largely from the outside looking in. The director of Barbie, she is, I think, a few years older than me. I think she's probably around your age, and you're my older brother, so I think she's around your generation. She was writing the movie largely to millennial women.
Mm-hmm.
When I saw it, I looked at this and I said, you know what? Most millennial women that I know are going to love this movie. And I was completely right. Did I particularly care for it? Not really. But I also knew that it wasn't a movie that was really trying to appeal to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can respect the hustle without necessarily loving the film.
Mm-hmm.
But again, as we said, gender, it's all about that. And despite what, and there's been a lot of sort of hoopla and discourse and hot takes and think pieces about Barbie, particularly because Barbie is not shy about being a very political movie.
Right.
It wears its politics on its sleeve. Characters have monologues where they talk about politics the entire movie has political jokes and political themes, and so I don't think it's I don't think it's a shocker to say, yeah, this is not it's not a particularly subtle movie. And there has been backlash against some people because of its politics, and some Christians have felt that politically speaking, it was at odds with them.
Right.
But I don't even think that's necessarily the case at all times. I don't know if what the director might have thought of this film, but the thing is, there are biblical elements that you can see in Barbie. Just at the very least, part of what, if we look at the sort of the idea of biblical gender roles, we have perfection in the garden,
mm-hmm.
where man and woman get along. And then sin enters the world.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the first thing that happens? Is that the man and the woman start blaming each other for it.
That's right.
And that the battle of the sexes, the ideal of God's perfect world is harmony between men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Sin creates discord between men. What is Barbie about? It is about discord between men and women.
Yeah, your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. The Barbie is all Genesis 3 played out over a couple of hours.
Correct. And it is very true that our society has not been fair to men and women. That men and women have not always had the same rights and have had lots and lots of conflict. And so on one hand, I think it's easy to sort of react to the political cause of the day when it comes to gender relations and react that way to Barbie, when really conflict between the sexes has been part of human history for eternity.
That's true.
And ultimately, what happens in Barbie is that they realize that there's these extreme versions of the world that are offered. So in Barbie Land, all the women run everything at the beginning of the movie. All the women run everything, and all the guys are sort of bumps on logs. And it's not good for them.
They don't have agency.
They don't have agency. They don't have purpose. They don't have anything that is important to them. Their entire identity is in Ken's entire identity is being Barbie's boyfriend.
They're accessories.
They're accessories. And then when Ken goes to the real world, all right, and he sees the fact that in the real world, that's the way that women have been treated for most of human history. And he thinks, this is awesome. Guys should run everything, and we should all do kung fu and ride horses and wear leather jackets. And that he thinks, well, that's the great way. But the problem is that that's not the solution either.
Right.
The solution is not men run everything or women run everything. Now, the movie, I don't think, doesn't necessarily spoon feed you exactly what the balance is.
Yeah, I think you have to kind of read between the lines in order to see that.
But what it does show is that Ken, at the end of the day, realizes that him running everything isn't the solution either. And that, and the Barbies in Barbie Land, it doesn't go back to the women running everything, because they realize, oh, this wasn't exactly that one group ruling the other group. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't sustainable. It was going to cause problems. That ultimately, this conflict between the men and the women, it came down to trying to get back to the garden.
That's right.
Trying to get back to harmony.
Because it's not good for a man to be alone.
No.
And so God created a helper suitable for him. And
Correct.
men and women are designed to complement each other. We're designed to work together, to be two halves of a whole, to be for one to be strong where the other is weak, for us to be able to work together. And we're always going to be better together than we are apart.
Right. And the thing is, the movie ends, I'm spoiling a movie that everybody's seen, but the movie ends with Barbie wanting to leave the dreamland, All right. She has this dreamland of where women rule the roost and everything's perfect, and realizing, no, I would rather enter the real world for all of its flaws. She wants to become a real person, and she teams up with the mom in the movie, and the mom, she has a husband. They're trying to make it work, and no, her life is not necessarily all that satisfying, but they move on to try to pursue what that balance is.
Mhm.
Movie doesn't offer you what the perfect balance is, but it offers you characters who realize that one gender ruling over the other completely, unquestioningly, one being an accessory to the other, that's not really where your identity is.
It's
Now,
not healthy.
the Christians look at this and say, your identity is actually in Christ.
Right. Yeah.
The movie doesn't say that. But the
Right.
thing is, we do have an answer for that.
Mhm.
That it's not about, being the president with the pink jet or whatever, and or being in the Mojo Dojo Casa house. Neither of those is where your identity is.
Right.
Your identity is in Jesus.
That's right. That's right. My reaction to Barbie reminded me of something important, I think, for those of us that are believers when we interact with media. And that is that we do tend to occasionally engage in witch hunts.
Yes.
And I'll say that because the very first review I heard of Barbie, this particular reviewer, it was an advanced screening. It was before it had been released, and this person was horrified by the opening sequence. And I will admit that there's a lot of imagery and symbolism going on in the opening sequence of Barbie. They're riffing on 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yes.
And so all of the little girls start taking their baby dolls and smashing them. And this reviewer, I don't think, watched more than the first 5 minutes of the film. And
there's a lot of that going around.
And so this person was horrified by some of the politics and some of the issues and some of the worldviews that were being presented in this film. And so I made the assumption that it was going to be 2 solid hours of, very of a worldview that was very antithetical to the gospel. And so then when a lot of my friends, including a lot of my Christian friends, were really excited about this film, I was like, how could you possibly be a part of this thing? And I jumped on that sort of witch hunt bandwagon. Like, this thing is bad. I heard a guy, he said it was awful. And then it was later, after the movie came out, that I heard some more reviews and some more takes and some more kind of thoughtful takes about some of the messages and some of the things that were going on creatively in the movie, where I was like, actually, this is a movie with a lot of layers.
Yeah. And the thing is, Barbie is good art, because what it ended up doing is that, because I've seen bad art. Mm-hmm. I've seen movies that are basically just political pamphlets, like, packaged in a movie. Mm-hmm. And while, like I said, Barbie is not subtle with how political it is, and it does make a lot of political points that are making statements about society that I might not necessarily agree with theologically. Because it asks questions, it allows for discussion, and it allows for, it allows for room to have layers, because good art has layers, even when all those layers are various shades of pink.
One of the things I really enjoy about streaming is that I can pause the show and have those moments with my kids, and I can say, hey guys, what's the message that this show or this movie is telling us? Like, what do we know about what's being said here? What do you guys think is being said here? And as much as I love, like, the theater and the smell of popcorn, as a dad who's raising kids and who's raising, little film junkies, I love being able to grab those teachable moments and have those conversations about, like, hey, what do you think is going on here? Because I don't know how other people watch movies, but at my house, when we're watching a movie like Barbie, like, we're going to pause and say, somebody want to go ahead and read Genesis 3? And we'll talk about that kind of stuff, even with me and with my kids. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Heights Podcast. Join us next week as Dan and I continue this conversation about the gospel and film. We worship every Sunday at our Alvin campus on the south side of the Houston metro area. We have worship services at 10:30 a.m. with life groups for all ages at 9 a.m. We also live stream to Facebook and YouTube. Be sure to follow and subscribe for more content from our church. And if you'd like to learn more about Heights Baptist Church, you can visit our website at heightschurch.org.